All right. Hey, everybody. I'm excited today to get into a topic that is really interesting to me. I've been a part of ministries in all sorts of ways that you could imagine. I've done missions trips that are all across the world, going to third world countries. I've done missions trips that end up having a lot of hard work and you're camping out the whole time. I've done camps. I have done youth ministry and college ministry. And everything that I've ever been a part of in ministry has always had more women that are a part of it than men. But as I've been a part of things with Ratio Christi and focused in apologetics, this has become the one place that I actually find more men are in. And so this has been an interesting thing to learn, especially as I've been running the chapter at Colorado State, that we just struggle to have girls. And so one of the things that I thought would be really helpful to kind of talk about is not only just for a ministry like Ratio Christi, if you're doing an apologetics ministry, but overall, why is this apologetics thing something that does seem to be harder to get women involved with than I would say any other type of ministry out there? And so with that, I thought it would make sense for me as a guy not to be the only one talking about it and to bring in someone that would be able to bring in the feminine perspective. And so one of the first people that came to mind is my friend Jane Pantig. And she has been a part of Ratio Christi since really the beginning. Since we first became a 501c3, she is one of the first two missionary staffs to join Ratio Christi. And so she's got a lot of insight. She's part of the Women in Apologetics movement to really try to grow a lot more women onto apologetics ministries. And so excited to have her with us. So Jane, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So first, before we kind of get into some of the questions, I would love for you to just share, I think probably an insight at the beginning is even hearing someone who is into apologetics as a girl and has found that to be something that they're engaging with. Why do you find that engaging? Maybe it's no different than I saw it. Or maybe there were some ways that you saw that differently from a feminine perspective, but share just a little bit of your story and how you ended up being a part of Ratio Christi.
Well, I became a Christian in college, so I was a science major. So when I became a believer my senior year, I kind of saw how hostile science professors could be towards any student who had belief in God. And so as a new believer, it just became more apparent to me that, whoa, I think I might have made a mistake becoming a believer. So it was just kind of, after I became a believer, people would say like, well, I had a classmate and he was atheist, and we were sitting in our evolution class, and he said, oh, why are you even taking this class? You don't even believe in it. Mm-hmm. And so I sat there and I was like, well, I need to know both sides. And I was a new believer. I didn't really know what Christians believed. I just knew evolution was just kind of problematic for a person who believed in God. Right. So that kind of just drove me to apologetics. I had a pastor at the first church I went to as a believer, and he was really into apologetics. So he would introduce us to all kinds of apologetics people, and I was like, there was one in particular, I was like, wow, this person is very articulate, and I want to be a Christian just like them. And so that was kind of the beginning of the pursuit of apologetics. It's just because I saw a need as a new believer that I needed to have good answers, especially being a science person. I didn't want to say I had this spiritual experience and this is just how I feel. But then when I came across the evidence, I was like, wow, why doesn't anybody talk about this? And why don't people know about this in academia? So, and why doesn't anybody in academia tell us about arguments for the existence of God? So, yeah, that's just kind of why I got into it.
Sweet. Okay. So then what was a little bit of your journey then from, all right, now I'm enjoying apologetics. You eventually went to Biola.
Yeah.
And then got on staff with Ratio.
Okay. So I actually never thought I would be doing something like this. Yeah. I was actually getting ready to do optometry school. That's all I ever wanted to be, was an optometrist. And well, when you follow the Lord, he kind of changes things up
Mm-hmm.
on you. And I didn't even know apologetics was something you could study at a university. So I
Yeah.
went online and I Googled Christian apologetics degrees, and Biola popped up. And I was like, okay, so this exists. I didn't even know what Biola was. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. So that was kind of like an idea I had. Just like, maybe I'll go study this. Um, and then I went to the Summer Institute in Wheaton, and I just met a whole bunch of people who went through the Biola program, and I was like, "That's weird. That's the school that I found online," and everybody just like raved about it. And at the end of the week of studying, like it was like intensive apologetics courses, I got to speak to at the time who was my very favorite apologist and asked him, "What school would you recommend to study apologetics?" And he gave two, and Biola was one of them. And so I ended up at Biola, and it happened pretty quickly. The application was due, I believe, in July, and it was June already. So I was like, well, I need to whip this out real fast. And then I was at Biola that August. So the Lord definitely put me on the fast track.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Awesome. So you've kind of answered this question a little bit already, but maybe there's something more that you'd want to add. What is it that just has drawn you to apologetics? What do you like about doing apologetics?
It just gives me confidence in knowing that the God that I believe it's just true. I don't want to believe anything that's not true. And it just causes me to worship because this is true. And so I don't want to be a person who has blind faith. So that's the main reason why. And especially when you share your faith, you're going to come across people who have questions. And that was I think the biggest need for apologetics in my life, because I love having conversations with people, and people have questions, like, especially when I became a believer, like, well, how can you believe in that? And so it just helps me in evangelism, just everyday conversations, like, especially when, like if you find out about really great food you want to tell people about it, or if you found this really good like gadget, you just want to tell people about it. And so I want to tell people about God, and well, the apologetics really helps me to have those conversations with people.
Yeah, definitely. So as I kind of mentioned, and part of the reason why I wanted to have you on was just there is this interesting element that it seems like, compared to all sorts of other types of ministries out there, whether it's missions and
Mm-hmm.
even ministries that you would kind of expect to have more of a guy majority, even in my experience, like with doing some missions that have been a little bit more like labor intensive and kind of we're out in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. My experience has still been that like even those ministries still ended up having more girls involved than guys, even though
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe that sense of adventure would be more appealing to guys than girls.
Mm-hmm.
Still had a girl majority, and then I do apologetics, and there's clearly a guy majority in this area.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? What are some of your thoughts?
I think a lot of women just have a misconception of what apologetics is because of the way they've seen it done. I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of what we've seen is just men going at it and arguing like philosophical
Right.
points, and women are just like, "What is this?" Like, so
Yeah.
people, like, a lot of women just see it as like academic debate, or like guys just want to puff up themselves with knowledge, or like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to win this argument.
Right.
And so that's not something women are compelled to join.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not practical for them. I think women want to see, like, how is this profitable or applicable to my life, and how do I use it? I'm not just gonna, premise one and just talk to people like that. I
Right.
don't think women are. They just don't engage in that way. They do it
Mm-hmm.
more in a relational, conversational way. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's kind of the difference, where guys just want to prove a point sometimes.
Right. Yeah. So do you think that a big part of this then is like being able to show more of how apologetics can be done well? Because
Yeah.
most
Hmm.
people's experience around apologetics is probably when it's not done well. Like, I think a
Yeah.
huge thing that I see at CSU is street preachers that come, and a lot of
Yeah.
times that's the thing that people think of with Christians overall.
Yeah.
and might even be what they think of when they think of apologetics specifically as the guy yelling on the street
Yeah.
corner.
Yeah. So what we're saying is apologetics needs a little bit of a facelift or a new like
Yeah.
PR manager and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think it's heavily marketed to men. Like I never really see programs in churches where it's like, yeah, women, let's study apologetics. It's always like, let's talk about how we can pray or how, like how can we be a better mom or how can we be a better wife? But they've never really focused on the life of the mind of a woman. And I think that's one of the things is to encourage women to think in that way. I think they've just always just taught them like, this is how you become a woman of God. And they
Right.
don't include the apologetics part.
Right. Do you think there's an element? So you're talking specifically about why, in some ways, it seems like there's a lack of focus for anything that's targeted towards women on apologetics. That's just never something that's mentioned. Do you also feel like that apologetics? Because I would say my experience has been that churches just don't focus on apologetics at all.
Yeah, and then that's even a bigger problem if the church is not doing it. Of course, women aren't going to be doing it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Would you say, though, do you think that to some extent, even when a church does actually engage in apologetics, that even that's marketed more towards men?
Well, yeah, I guess that's what happens because all the apologetics conferences I've been to, it's a bunch of men. I mean, even when I went to Biola, I was probably the only woman in class in several of my classes. So I'm just like, yeah, this is kind of intimidating as a woman, like stepping in a room with just a whole bunch of dudes.
Yeah, no doubt. How do you think, like, especially, when I think of a church that's just gonna, hey, we're gonna do an apologetics series or whatever, how do you think maybe there's a way to make sure that you're marketing that in a way that's going to be appealing to women? Like I did a series last year at my church, and we had a pretty good mixed crowd. I don't think I felt like there was a huge side one way or another with that. But is there certain ways that a church can be aware as, hey, we've decided that we do want to do an apologetics class or whatever, words to use or whatever in order to market that in a way that women will be engaged?
Yeah, I think packaging really matters for women. Like we like beautiful products. So, I mean, if this flyer doesn't look that great, it's like it's not going to draw attention to women. But also marketing in a way where women see the need for it. I think sometimes we don't show them the need for apologetics. Like, how is this practical and how do you live this out? I think most of the time it's like, does God exist and are miracles possible? Just like the big questions. But the why of why we do apologetics should probably be included when you're like telling people you should come to this and learn how to do this and then how is this going to be used outside of just having head knowledge.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think you may be frozen, but we're hearing your audio fine, so we'll just keep plugging through. So what sort of things, like, even just to throw one out there, if you were to market just a general apologetics thing, instead of just saying, like, I usually, end up kind of taking the Frank Turek method of, we're going to teach you truth exists, God exists, scripture is the word of God, and Jesus is God. Instead of throwing that on a flyer, what would you put on a flyer?
Learn ways to share your faith with loved ones, something like that. How to, like a lot of women have kids. I mean, they spend most of their time with their kids. And I mean, a lot of the times when I talk to women, they always come to me like, I think my son is losing their faith or my daughter is losing their faith. And can you talk to them? So it's like, maybe we could tell them, like, we're going to teach you how to talk to your own kids instead of sending them off to somebody to answer all their questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Definitely. So what do you think are, part of it, we were mentioning that a lot of this is, we need to give apologetics a facelift. We need to remarket all of that sort of thing. What are some of the misconceptions you think that women generally have regarding apologetics?
It's just for intellectuals. I mean, apologetics is for everybody that's a believer. It doesn't say it's just for the smart ones. But a lot of times when I talk to other people, they're just like, oh, apologetics are for like the really smart Christians. So I'm not smart enough to do that. And I think the problem is like maybe they have seen it done in a way it's like they don't understand it. And I think that's what we need to do is like we need to say it in a way that your normal person can understand it. So take those premises and talk in everyday language to them and not, yeah, here, premise one, premise two, conclusion, bam. It's just like talk to them like how you would talk in a conversation, I think is the best way.
Right. Definitely.
Yeah.
For me, I think one element that I've always thought is I think it's that apologetics is often seen as very combative,
Yes.
which is sometimes true. But I think if it's done in the right way, it doesn't feel that way as much. I think that's why a lot of us so much love tactics and Greg Kokel and everything that he teaches, because it's teaching you how to ask questions. It's teaching you how to, instead of being like, you're wrong and here's 50 million sources of why you're wrong, and just getting them with that, you're kind of like, well, what's made you come to that conclusion? Why do you think that? And working almost more as with the person than against the person to talk about it. Do you think that's another element of it, is that women see it generally, and generally apologetics is seen as being this combative thing, and we need to even remarket that in a sense?
Yeah, I think we need to make it personal. Like there's a person behind the question. I know they talk about that in Tactics. I think that's the book that says that. But I think oftentimes we just look at their question and just the question. But like, why is that person even asking that question? Is there something that's happened in their life that they don't think God exists? And usually there is something, like they had a bad experience in church or something like that. So I think women are good at reading body language and kind of just being in tune with people's emotions a little bit more. And I think that's what women can bring to apologetics. So what was the question again?
that like is the combative element. Do you think that's a big reason why women are turned off?
Oh yeah, like just the other night at one of our Ratio Christi meetings, we had this one guy who was a guest, and one of our interns was giving a talk, and he was just being combative with him while this guy's giving his presentation. And I turned around, and there's this new girl that comes, who's like, it's kind of spicy in here. And I was like, yeah, some guys, they just like to go at it. So I have to explain that away to make sure it was her first time. So I was like, this is her exposure. It's like, she might not come back. But like, for people who understand that, like, women could get anxious in situations like that. It's like, oh, I don't know what to do. Those guys seem like they're fighting. It's like, that's what I get. Like, when you take a woman aside and ask them, hey, what did you think about the meeting? They usually say, it's like, oh, that was a little spicy. That got a little heated, and it's just like, I think women are there to like kind of bring the temperature down a little bit. So I had to say, hey, let him continue to speak. We could discuss this at the end of the meeting, But I think most guys don't catch that, and they're just like, they just keep going and going, and nobody's going to stop them. So I think that's why women should be involved in apologetics.
Do you think that's even like, was that someone that even was necessarily like, I don't know, were they a believer, not a believer, and that's why they're combating?
So I guess this person is a believer, but I think because he was Catholic, he didn't hold the same views as evangelical. So got a little heated in there.
There can always be a little bit of like some theological things that come out of the woodwork in these discussions, for sure. Definitely. You mentioned that like women can be an element of like bringing down the temperature when it comes to some of these discussions. Which I think is like, and I think part of that is understanding that I think women, in my view, are more naturally inclined to be able to just see the person in the question, as we were just saying. And that's an element that I think is part of the reason we want more women involved in apologetics, is because we need more of that. Are there other elements that you look at that you're just like, this is part of where maybe like apologetics has gone awry, and having more women involved will help to make apologetics thrive more the way that it should?
Well, I think sometimes apologetics could be presented in a very dry way. Like
Hmm.
people are just up there reading your paper to you, just
Yeah.
point by point giving the argument. There isn't much character or personality behind it.
Right.
I mean, you could bring in humor or something,
Hmm.
but it's just like women. I think a lot of women just get bored because they're just like, that guy's just there talking and talking and
Hmm.
talking. And so I think that's one of the things. Yeah, and I think women, I mean, if you ever been, well, I don't know if you ever been to a women apologetics conference. I think women just present differently, and
Hmm.
they bring in a lot of stories and like real life application. And I think we just need to hear that more from the men instead of here's some knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're even bringing, you said, you asked if I've been to a women apologetics conference.
You can go.
I
You're
can
allowed.
go.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah,
That's great to know.
yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll have to just keep my eye out next time that there's, at least if there's one ever around here, or even
Yeah.
try to go to one that's out of state if I can.
Yeah, and some men have come to um, our conferences, and they're just like, "Wow, I've never heard that argument that way." So
Right.
yeah, we do bring a different element to it. So.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
That'll definitely be something that we'll have to put in the description, is a link
Mm-hmm.
to Women in Apologetics, so people can
Mm-hmm.
kind of check out the things that they're up to, because I think that's super cool movement that's going on. Do you think that there's an element that just in two ways, I guess this is a two-part question, that our
Mm-hmm.
culture as like American culture or Western culture is partly responsible for the reason why women are less interested in this, or even church culture? Like, I think, especially I think of the ways that women have
Yeah.
generally not been seen as able to teach, especially in some churches.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And that apologetics is like, so if you especially apply that element of what you were just saying earlier of apologetics is often seen as this is where the really smart people go.
Mm-hmm.
If a woman even feels like she is that person, she might not feel like she can actually be in that role within either church or our culture. Do you think
Mm-hmm.
that's an element of this as well?
Yeah, like there's different perspectives on women teaching, and I think I
Yeah.
struggled with that a lot because I was like, okay, I'm getting this apologetics degree, but if I'm a woman and I'm not allowed to teach, like what's the point of me doing this? And like I
Right.
struggled with that a lot. So
Yeah.
I had to work that out, and I had to get encouragement. So yeah, there's some people who are just like, you should not be teaching. You're a
Mm-hmm.
woman. And it's just like, okay, well, maybe I just won't go hang out with those people and go where
Right.
I'm welcomed. It's like, I don't want to be a pastor. I'm not trying to be like a leader. I just want to help people defend their faith and just be better evangelists. I'm not trying to take any man's job or anything like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think a lot of, there's just like, what is a woman's role in the church is kind of could be the issue why a lot of women don't get involved in apologetics because they don't think they're allowed to do those kinds of things.
Right. Yeah. Do you think so? Like, obviously, there's the church element.
Mm-hmm.
Any church that is really hard on the women can't teach,
Yeah.
that's definitely gonna hinder a woman, I think, from being involved in it. Do you think our culture as a whole, outside of church, contributes to that at all?
Well, the culture is so interesting now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nowadays people think, you just do whatever you want. But I think women and men are geared to do things differently. And I think uh, it's just kind of hard to say, like
Mm-hmm.
in general, like culture. Because I think women, like, there's plenty of women who are academic. So I don't know what in the culture would stop women in particular from not pursuing apologetics. I think it's more in the church.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you would you mind, even, do you have any experiences with that you'd mind just kind of sharing, just so that can be something that people can kind of,
Yeah.
especially as a guy, can kind of understand, all right, this is probably part of a reason that a girl might find this intimidating to get involved with, or you know
Well,
whatever.
you just literally have people tell you you're not supposed to be teaching.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
like, Like, what do I do with that?
Right.
And then, there's people who are more encouraging. It's like, we need your voice because you're a woman. You could talk to women. I can't, like, especially if you're doing evangelism to the Muslim world. A man can't just like go talk to a woman. And
Right.
so there's like men who are more encouraging, like, yeah, you could do things that I can never do.
Mm-hmm.
So it just depends on who you come across.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
I think, yeah, just understanding like what our roles are within the church. There, it's a secondary issue, but it does hinder people from pursuing a lot of things.
Right. Do you see that, like, for me, there is an element that, kind of going back to the combative element of this. I have always seen, in some sense, to me, that part of the reason I think guys end up being more interested in it is because I think guys naturally have this desire to protect, this desire to defend, that
Yeah.
I think is more particular to a guy than it is to a
Yeah.
girl.
Yeah.
And so because of that, like, especially in a place like the US, it's not really that we're having these opportunities of, I need to protect this girl from whatever.
Yeah.
In our society, that doesn't come up very often. Chances
Mm-hmm.
are I'm probably never going to have to actually physically protect any girl that I'm ever with from someone. It does happen, but like, that's probably not going to be a thing where, when it comes to me being able to stand up and to defend Christ and to defend the church, that is something that I can daily engage with. And so I think I have, as a guy, a drive to do that more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Do you think girls have just as much of a desire for that, or is that something that is maybe a little different between guys and girls?
Yeah, I think that could be. Yeah, I think guys, are more protective. I think women are more nurturing. So I think that's why we bring a different aspect into apologetics, because
Right.
we want to help people through their hard questions and be nurturing and be more like a counselor.
Right.
And I think men tend to be more like, I'm going to teach you this. So
Right. Yeah. But as you mentioned, like, I think remarketing that, because yes,
mm-hmm.
that's how oftentimes I talk about apologetics is defending the Christian faith,
Yeah.
history,
Yeah.
science, and
Yeah.
philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I'm marketing it in some ways to men by saying it in
Yeah. Yeah.
those terms.
Yeah.
So maybe figuring out more of like, it's engaging with the reasons through history, science, and philosophy.
Yeah.
We know Christianity is true,
Yeah.
both to be able to defend it, but also to help grow and disciple the people around us. And that maybe speaks a little bit more towards some of the feminine desire to nurture in that. Like, how do we market even that sort of elevator pitch more towards women and their desires?
Yeah. I think, apologetics is always like, when you see the marketing for it, there's like a sword or some kind of like a weapon or your armor and stuff like that. But I think maybe something along the lines of, hey, let's go through the hardest questions of faith, things that people struggle with. And you're just kind of like on that side of things, rather like defend. Like I like to say, like, let's talk about the deep questions of life. And then also it's like, also say things like, how do we answer questions about our faith? Or giving reasons. It doesn't say defend, it says giving,
Right.
So it's like a different approach, but it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Because I don't think that language, I don't think would turn any guy off.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it probably will engage women more than the word of a defense would, for sure.
Or especially the word argument. So like people are like, oh, they're just like arguing. And lots of times women see argumentative people. So there's like, I don't think that's for me. Because I think women tend to be more like peacemakers and avoid conflict. So if they see that, they're like, oh, that's definitely not for me. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, for sure. Do you think there's any like apologetics focused ministries, I mean, outside of obviously like women and apologetics, that you think is doing a really good job appealing to women to get involved in apologetics?
Yeah. Yeah, so Hillary Ferreira from Mama Bear Apologetics, she's already
Hmm.
has like 2 books out.
Right.
And it's like helping women like teach their children or just like even questions for themselves. And it's very approachable. It's a good read. It's not like they explain philosophy in a way that your everyday person will get it. Elisa Childers is doing great with her podcast. And you just go to Women in Apologetics, they highlight all kinds of women, so you
Hmm.
could find a bunch of them there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Um, Other elements that you think we should touch on this? I think I've kind of got through the questions that I have. But we got a couple of people that might throw some questions into the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but any thoughts that you would like to add into this?
Well, yeah, I, I I work with men all the time in apologetics. So like
Hmm.
I watch them and you just see them like going at it, giving explanations, and I'm just like, man, I just want to like hug that kid. Like,
Yeah.
and it's literally sometimes I don't think some guys they don't know when to stop the conversation because I
Yeah.
see it and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this person's ready. Their body shutting down. They're like trying to back out of the
Right.
conversation, and the guys just like keep going.
Hmm.
So I'm just like, you need to stop.
Right.
Like, so yeah, it's just I think that's why a woman should be there so they could kind of like diffuse the situation sometimes.
Right.
And I think men and women should work together doing apologetics. And I think it's just a beautiful thing because we're complementary. Like,
Right.
so when people are like, oh, yeah, women shouldn't be doing these kinds of things, it's just like, well, we just add something different. We
Hmm.
just don't do it the same way you're doing it. We're not
Hmm.
just going to go there and give people arguments. I can't, like, intellectual people probably will look at women who do apologetics like, oh, that that isn't that great of an argument or like the way they presented it because it's not done the way they want it to be done. But that's because we reach a different audience. We're not
Right.
talking to the philosophers or like the academics. I mean, some women are probably doing it, but for the most part, women are doing it because they love people and they want to show people the truth of Christianity and point them to Jesus. And so I think for women, they're really doing it for evangelism and to also help have good conversations with their kids, family, friends, etc. So
Hmm.
women are just, it's more for a relational component.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay, we're getting a couple of questions online. So here's one for you.
All right.
Do you agree that one of the ways to help ignite and motivate fellow sisters in apologetics is to lead by example, in the sense of planning to lead a class or write a
Yeah.
book?
Yeah. Your character matters. I think a lot of the
Hmm.
times apologists can be jerks. So I think that
Yeah.
women aren't going to want to go into like, I love apologetics and I'll like watch things on YouTube and I'm just like, he is just a jerk. Like,
Right.
calm down, dude. Like,
Right. Yeah. There's even an element that I think it makes me think of even the guys that I have.
uh-huh.
There's some element sometimes that I think are as Ratio Christi,
Hmm.
because it is a ministry that is going a lot more in depth in some ways,
Yeah.
like where I see all the other campus ministries and I think they're almost like another church service.
Hmm.
Ours is closer to another class. Like,
Yeah.
try to make it a lot more discussion based. That's something that
Yeah.
our chapter is trying to grow a lot more in, so it doesn't really feel like another class, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
still, I think, closer to another class than it is to another Sunday morning
Yeah.
service.
Hmm.
And so with that, it also attracts, like, we're the ministry that's going to attract the engineers and the philosophy majors,
Yeah.
and with that comes a level of socially awkward students that we end up a lot of time bringing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think, would you say that part of that as well is something that, bringing some women to the table to bring those conversations in allows maybe to help people grow in that social awkwardness that sometimes are the
Yeah.
things that we
I think
recruit.
women do help people, like help men in that way. It's like,
Mhm.
hey, probably shouldn't do it that way, or hey, nobody's going to listen to you if you're just yelling at them. Like literally, I have to tell one of our students, like, nobody's going to want to listen to you if you're not even trying to listen to what the other person has to say. He just calls people heretics. And I'm just like, that's not going to win people to Jesus if
Right.
that's not helpful to a conversation. So
Right.
I think helping people with social cues and like
Right.
social awareness, I think women are more in tune to see as like, yeah, that we need to help this person out.
Right. Yeah. And even
Yeah.
just having guys and girls in a room and helping them learn to, as college and high school students, them learn to have conversations with the opposite sex that, like, at times I've even had a point with some of my students that I'm like, I got to teach these guys, like, just how to talk to a girl. Like,
Isn't that bad?
there's moments, there's been moments
Okay.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's partly because I think what we do ends up attracting a little bit more of the nerd types, and sometimes the socially awkward comes along with that, for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We have a book club. So like outside of our regular meetings, we call it the Nerd Herd.
Okay.
So it's like there's something for those people who are just really highly intellectual and just want to have those conversations outside of a regular meeting, so they don't bore the rest of the people who aren't like that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Another question somebody wrote in. You had a great discussion with, this one's more for me, I guess. You had a great discussion with a world-class top Muslim scholar, Ijaz Ahmed, months ago. What advice would you guys give in regard to women engaging Islam and apologetics? So this is still to both of us.
Okay. Well, I've been to a Muslim country, and it's just women and women, like if a man walked in the room, you had to like cover yourself. So you're not going to just have missionaries go be sent out to Muslim countries. You really, like, just any guy go out. Like, you really need to respect their culture and have the women do it. So, yeah, I think that's where apologetics is helpful for women. It's because those women are going to reach those women.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Some of the advice that I think I would throw in is really to ask questions. I mean, this applies to everything. This applies to some of what we've already been saying. So this discussion that I had with this scholar, it was in some ways funny to me because we were debating. He was literally trying to debate with me that Jesus was never crucified. Not even that he hadn't been risen from the dead, but he was trying to say from a secular viewpoint, we don't have good enough reasons to believe that Jesus was crucified, which is pretty crazy to believe. And he was just throwing as much doubt on any knowledge that we could have of any history whatsoever in that. And I think a lot of my experience from that debate was I would really push back. And what was interesting in that is we were kind of set up to debate that specifically. And I think in the future, I would make sure if I ever did a debate like that again, I would make sure that there's an element of, all right, we're going to debate this, that I need to defend the Christian side. And alongside that, we're also going to talk about that you need to defend the Muslim side on another element. Because what that allowed him to somewhat try to do in that debate was put all of the question to the historicity of the Christian claim without also putting Islam under the exact same scrutiny. Because if he was to be as skeptical as he was for the historical sources and things that I was bringing up regarding Jesus's crucifixion and question Islam, then he wouldn't believe that Muhammad even existed, regardless of whether he made a book called the Quran. And so, not that you're going to do a formal debate like that, but I think most people are going to engage with people, and so much of it is you need to get them to defend their own thoughts as well. So way too many times, and this isn't just with Islam, but people end up throwing out this crazy theory and they assume or they question Christianity like crazy, go completely skeptical with it, yet they're not applying the same scrutiny to their own viewpoint. And so to be able to ask questions back to them to show them like, hey, if we're going to put this much question to and scrutiny to the claims that Christianity is making, then if you're going to say that Christianity is false based upon that level of scrutiny that you're giving to Christianity, well, let's test what you believe and see if it also holds up to that scrutiny. Because once we start doing that, and that's what this debater tried to do with me, is once I started to say, hey, well, if you're going to be that skeptical of this, then I don't have good enough reason to believe that Muhammad existed. And he was like, well, that's not what we're debating. And so there was a level that it's just like, all right, this doesn't really make sense to just debate that singular thing. So when you're in conversation with someone, I think always making sure that they're defending what they believe as well. I think Muslims that are willing to engage in the conversation will oftentimes be confident enough that they feel like they can go really hard on the offensive and give the defense to the offensive arguments that they're making, but also put them on defense as well and get them to ask questions and scrutinize their own faith with the same level that they're scrutinizing our faith is an important element to it. So any other thoughts you would add, Jane?
I didn't watch that discussion, so I have no idea what you guys are even talking about.
That's totally fine. I mean, I think they were asking more particularly just how you would engage with a Muslim. And I think, to me, it's just really asking them questions.
Yeah.
Just like you would anyone else. And I think that issue of Jesus's death and resurrection is probably one of the best topics to get into, because once they start seeing all of the evidence for that, it's very well grounded historically that Jesus was crucified. Like, to deny that, like, goes against pretty much every scholar that is in that area of antiquity, and the scholars that disagree aren't really well respected within the field. And so it becomes pretty one-sided once you engage with that. And that ultimately, like, if Jesus did die according to what the Bible says, then Islam's incorrect. There's always the Islamic Dilemma, which you can find if you just Google that on YouTube. That's something that, oh gosh, why am I forgetting his name? The guy,
Michael? No. What's his name? David Wood.
David Wood. Bill Wood's a friend of mine here locally. I was like, that's not right. David Wood really, really does a great job. He puts together this video called The Islamic Dilemma. Now it's on somebody else's YouTube channel because he's quit YouTube. But just showing how Islam essentially says that the Bible can be trusted, and that because it's the word of God, Allah will protect it and it won't get changed. And the Bible says that Jesus arose from the dead. So if the Quran's correct, that the Bible is trustworthy, then it's saying that the Quran isn't trustworthy and the Quran is false. And if the Quran is incorrect, that the Bible is trustworthy, then the Quran's incorrect. Either way, you're kind of out of water, so to speak. So here's a great question. What would you suggest would be a good place for women to start if they're interested in doing apologetics?
Yeah, I would wonder what kind of level they're going for, because there's like a lot of popular level apologetics.
Sure.
So yeah, go check out some of what women have written. Mama Bear Apologetics. She has two books now. Elisa Childers is doing. I think she's probably on her second book. And then what's her name? Natasha Crane. She does really good stuff for kids. So it just depends on what kind of level of apologetics you want to jump into. If you need something a little more basic, I think a lot of the stuff that Mama Bear does is very approachable. It's not something to be like, oh my gosh, I don't know this philosophy. So that's a good start. Yeah, tactics is great if you want to have conversations in apologetics. Yeah, because when I first became a believer, I had no tactics. We just like went at it, and you're like, yeah, I did that all wrong. So, yeah, I highly recommend tactics when you're trying to talk to people with apologetics. So character matters a lot, and how you communicate things is an art. I think that's something, when people get a hold of apologetics, they use it as a weapon. And so it's like,
Right.
there's better ways to communicate this if you really want to win souls to Jesus.
Yeah.
But go hop onto the Women Apologetics website. They have lots of blog articles on there. Just really good stuff to read. Follow Women in Apologetics on their Instagram. They have like just little arguments on there. They make point by point for some certain topic, and it's really pretty. So, women like pretty things.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. All right. Well, any other last things, Jane, you would like to add, or if anybody's watching and you still have a question you want to throw out there, we'll probably wrap it up here soon. But wanted to give anybody any last thoughts or questions you wanted to throw out.
Yeah, like for anyone who wants to get an apologetics, just remember it's not just about arguing philosophical points. I think there's other ways to do it, and I think we just need to find ways that we can do apologetics with our own personality and the way we like to speak to people. Because I think when I first got into apologetics, I'd go to apologetics conferences, and I'm like, I can never talk like that person. Like we want to become like that person on stage, but it's like, no, like be yourself and, learn these arguments and explain it to people in a way that you best explain it, so don't try to just regurgitate it, like actually know it and use your own like personality in it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I don't think we had any other questions thrown out there, so we'll wrap it up there. And if you have, do you want to give a final thought, Jane? I usually try to let my guests end the stream.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my friend Hillary Ferreira says, women need apologetics and apologetics need women. So there you go.
Love it. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining in. And next week we'll probably be doing an episode with actually the intern that's out in Utah, Cole. Just probably talking a little bit about some just broad ways to talk with people who are Mormon and how to have conversation with them and share your faith with them. So join us next week for that.
He's not our intern now. His girlfriend is our intern.
Oh, right. Yes, that's fair. Is he joining staff or anything?
Yeah, he's going to join staff, I think in January.
Okay. That's awesome. Sweet. Cool. Well, we'll catch you guys all next week. Thanks again.